Hello, friends. Thank you for being here. We know some others are going to be trickling in, but we're so glad you could be back today. And given that many of you are here, most of you are here, or maybe all of you are here for the whole series, I'm not going to share Professor Eitan Fishbane's full bio again now verbally. And with that, we're excited to be back here with Self and Mystical Identity in 16th Century Kabbalah. Sounds, as you know from session one, it's been very rich. And as usual, you can always put a question or thought in the chat as we're going, but we'll generally save the actual interaction and dialogue as much as possible for the last 15 to 20 minutes. So with that, thank you all for being here and handing it over to Professor Fishbane.
Thank you, Rav Shmuley, and good to see all of you, and to continue our exploration of this topic of self and identity in 16th century Kabbalah. And as promised last time, we're gonna pick up with a little bit more of both the first PDF that we were looking at, and then another one that continues on this theme. So in other words, both that today also we'll be talking about the theme of soul and self and reincarnation, and the question of how Kabbalists understood the nature of core identity. And we had been looking last time specifically at the way in which the soul of the person is understood to have been quite literally born of the metaphysical substance of divinity. That is to say, it's part of the emanation of God's very self, right? And so this raises this grounding question for both the class and this book of mine that will eventually be born, probably not directly from God's essence, but more from in some number of years. But I've been working on this for a while. But the core notion that the soul of the person, the very essence of human identity, which is the eternal soul, right? And it's eternal precisely because it is part of the eternity that is divinity. And Vital, that the main disciple, or very important disciple of Isaac Luria, the Ari, says, as we looked at last time, that this is a an ultimate reflection of the idea that Banim atem Adonai Elohechem, you are literally children of the Lord your God, right? Which has, as we talked about last time, has this very evocative resonance with the way Christian thought evolved, but this is also very much a part of Jewish religious thinking. They're actually, among other things, there was an important, I think, 700 or 800 page book by Moshe Idel called Ben, Sonship in Jewish Mysticism, where he deals with a lot of that, some of those questions. But here, and this is on page still 3 of that first PDF. In finishing, we did finish up this text, but I just want to recap a little bit of it before we move on to the part that comes after. That the energies of the divine realm above come to dwell upon the person, and not through the intermediary of another light. In other words, that they are part of the very essence of divinity. Voten Hena Merkava, which as we mentioned last time, has its origins in rabbinic literature. The the patriarchs, the fathers, are the chariot, and what does that really mean in that rabbinic context? But in this context, it seems to mean that the human being is in fact of the same substance and reality as divinity, right? And if and as a kind of um, a larger dimension, or a larger framework for the notion that the soul is this emanated piece of God, right? That we have a chelek Elohim mima'al, a portion of divinity from above within ourselves, as is used quite a bit in mystical literature, that this stems from the very idea that God is the monistic totality, oneness of all being. Monism being the God. God is the oneness that is the all of being. God is the oneness. God is the oneness that is the all of being. And as is often said in various sources in mystical literature, ein od milvado, there is nothing other than God. Not just that there is no other God other than God, but there is ein od. There is nothing other than God. So to some extent, to a great extent, that's the kind of ontology, or the nature of, or the theory of being and reality that underlies all of this, right? And our souls are fragments, or at least apparent fragments, right? Because they're all part of that one light that is God. And this is right. It says here, the light of the souls is a garment for the light of the 10 sfirot, right? So the 10 sfirot, which are generally understood as these 10 rivers of the divine essence, of the divine energy. And this is the secret of my beloved has descended to his garden, Dodi Yarad Legano. So in other words, which is this world, Olam Hazeh, right? So our world is the garden that the beloved, meaning God, has descended into, and has therefore filled us with God's essence. And this is the secret of Atem Hadvekim Adonai Elohechem. This is the secret of you who cleave to God, to Yudevave from Deuteronomy 4, which is a complete conjoining, a dibuk gamur im or ha'eser sfirot, right? So the light of the soul, or the soul of the person, is completely bound and bonded and unified with the light, i.e., the very substance and essence of divinity. So are we these things called human beings? Are we extensions of divinity? Where does divinity end and humanness begin? And the answer to that is somewhat perplexing, because the very fragments of the eternal souls that are both at the core of human identity for the Lurianic Kabbalists and those before them and then after them, and which then go on this journey of reincarnation and rebirth over many different physical lifetimes, right? Which is which we mentioned last time, is a central part of Kabbalistic thought and of a variety of world cultures. That core element of soul stems from and is part of God. But nevertheless, as we're about to see, nevertheless, that eternal soul, which is part of divinity, right, and that's why it's eternal. is composed of different parts, different soul elements, just like the ancient Greeks spoke about the rational soul and the appetitive soul and so forth. So we have different elements of soul that are spoken of in Kabbalistic literature: the ruach, the nefesh, ruach, neshama, kaya, and yechida, progressively higher dimensions of soul that are gradually acquired and repaired and perfected over many different physical lifetimes to affect the tikkun, a repair and a perfection of the soul, which can then ultimately be reabsorbed into the infinite light of Ein Sof, of infinity, from which everything began. But the process of Jewish conceptions of reincarnation, or Kabbalistic conceptions of reincarnation and rebirth, is such that in every embodied physical lifetime, even if the body is understood to be this fleeting, evanescent garment for the true self that is the soul, in each of its parts that has to go through different physical garments in order to repair itself, it still needs its embodiment. It needs the encasement of its finite physical life in order, specifically from their point of view, to perform particular mitzvot that can only be done in an embodied form, and which will contribute very directly to the gradual repair of the soul, which is an extension of divinity, over the arc of time. So among the pieces that I'd like us to look at to anchor this idea, and we'll get to the mitzvot, some sections about the mitzvot shortly. The first piece is this section that I translated, called "A Person," where it says a person is obligated to study Torah according to the 4 rungs that it contains. This is on it says page 6 of 24 at the bottom, which correlates to that article that's forthcoming, and it's page 4. It's page 4 of the PDF. And the idea is that the study of Torah itself, right, because that's understood to be one of the greatest mitzvot that the person can perform in life, right? Talmud Torah keneged kulam, even the ancient rabbis said, right? The study of Torah is equivalent to them all, or stands in for them all, relates directly to our souls, right? So the Torah study that we're doing now, and that one does in general, is about connecting to our soul ancestry that actually stood at Mount Sinai. So we see here, a person is obligated to study Torah according to the 4 rungs that it contains. So that's a reference to the Pardes method of interpretation, meaning the 4-fold method of interpretation, which is really pshat, plain sense meaning or contextual meaning, drash, homiletical meaning, remez, hint, allegory, in some cases philosophy, and sod, which is Kabbalah, and was given the Pardes acronym just because it was a little bit more catchy than Padras, and also because Pardes means the orchard and the heavenly orchard. So know that the total of all the souls is 600,000 and not more. But what he really means by that is that these are like the soul configurations, or the soul clusters, from which there flow almost countless numbers of soul light branches. The Torah is the root of the souls of Israel. This is very interesting. HaTorah hi shoresh nishmot Yisrael. For from her they were hewn. Ki mimena chutzvu, and in her they are rooted. So the Torah here is the root of the souls of Israel. He's not necessarily going back at this moment anyway to the primordial cataclysm of the scattering of the soul sparks, but that something else happened also with heavenly Torah as this quarry of souls, right? That there's this kind of metaphysical, spiritual Torah, right? Not necessarily the physical Torah that we take out of the ark, or even the Torah that we study, though it's all part of that, right? Because he's saying that's why we need to study these four levels of meaning, because they relate to this primordial Torah through which the world was created, and which is, according to the Kabbalists, actually an ontological, you see how much I love the word ontological, extension of divinity, right? That God is that Torah is an extension of divinity, just like the logos of early Christian thought, right? So the beginning of the Gospel of John, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh, has a correlate directly in ancient rabbinic literature about the preexistence of the Torah as the primordial word and wisdom from which everything was emanated and evolved. And Daniel Boyarin has a couple of important studies of this, including a book called Borderlines: The Partition of Judeo-Christianity, which talks specifically about logos theology. But here it's saying Torah is the root of the souls of Israel. So our soul ancestry, or the Jewish soul ancestry, is hewn from this primordial word / wisdom of metaphysical Torah, right? Metaphysical Torah that is essentially also an emanation of divinity, because God is everything, right? But it said very explicitly that Torah especially is this manifestation of God. So our souls were, the souls of Israel were hewn, chutzvu, from this quarry, right? The spiritual quarry of Torah above. And thus there are 600,000 meanings in the Torah. Yesh b'Torah shishim ribo perushim, all of which are according to Pshat, and 600,000 meanings according to Remez, and 600,000 according to Drash, and 600,000 according to Sod. In other words, that there are 600,000, just as there are 600,000 soul clusters or soul roots, so too, and right, corresponding to the putative belief that there were 600,000 souls at Mount Sinai, and so therefore there are 600,000 meanings according to each of the four levels of meaning. So it's not just 600,000 total, but 600,000 for each of them, because they're all part of that oneness, right? And from each of the 600,000 meanings, one soul from Israel came into being. From each of the 600,000 meanings, right? It's sort of this amazing conflation of the hermeneutics of the metaphysical Torah, right? The interpretation and meanings of this spiritual exalted text is also the origin of the soul root, of the soul of a specific soul or soul cluster in among the Jewish people. And in the time to come, each and every Jew will know the entire Torah according. So get ready. In the time to come, You will know the entire Torah according to the meaning that is aligned with the root of his soul, of their soul. It's very fascinating. For through that meaning, they were created and brought into being. Right? It's that the idea of meaning itself, this meaning of this metaphysical Torah, is the antecedent or the root of our soul ancestry, of the individual Jew's soul ancestry. And in the time to come, in this kind of eschatological redemptive vision of what will be, every Jew will know the entire Torah according to the meaning that is aligned with their soul. So there's a kind of a sense in which our spiritual purpose in life becomes one of discovering what is your spiritual meaning of the Torah, your spiritual piece of the puzzle of meaning that is part of the fabric of your essence and your soul, right? So and the same could be said, as we'll see when we talk about the mitzvot more specifically, that we also have come into this world, according to the Kabbalists, each physical embodied form of self, in order to do a particular mitzvah, in order to help repair the soul, right? Or to adapt Robin Williams' character in Dead Poets Society. What will your mitzvah be, right? Right. The powerful cycle of reincarnation goes on, and you may contribute a mitzvah. Right? I guess people don't know the script of that movie as well as I do. Okay, the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse, boys. Carpe diem. And this goes on also. This goes on also into the text below, where the meaning of the soul is taught to the person while they're sleeping in heaven above. Thus, every night, and here I'm on the next page of that same PDF, the last page of that PDF. Thus, every night while a person sleeps, he deposits his soul, and it departs and ascends above, because this was an idea that became that was really developed in the Zohar in particular, upon which the later Kabbalah was heavily influenced. That when we sleep, a small portion of our soul sticks around with the body to keep it alive, which is handy. And then the majority of the soul goes up to the heavenly Garden of Eden to learn Torah with God and the rest of the souls, right? In the Yeshiva Shel Mala, up above in the heavenly Garden of Eden, and especially at midnight when the Holy One descends in order to rejoice and delight with those souls in the Garden of Eden, it says in the Zohar. So the soul ascends above, and they meaning the various angels and characters and other souls and the divine staff, if you will, and the other melamdim, the other teachers above. They teach the person there the meaning upon which the root of their soul is based. Melamdim lo sham oto haperush shebo talui shoresh nishmato. Haperush shebo talui shoresh nishmato. Right, that the root of our soul depends upon a particular perush, a particular interpretation of the Torah that has a metaphysical source above. And indeed, all is according to the manner of that person's actions on that day, right? So we have to also be careful about how we're acting during the day, because if we don't act with the right kind of character, presumably in the right kind of enactment of mitzvot, then we're not going to be lucky enough to receive this particular instruction above in our sleep, when our soul ascends upward to the Garden of Eden to be tutored by the heavenly teachers. On that night, they teach him an individual verse or a particular section. Right? What will your verse be? When we ascend to the heavenly realm, they have a particular pasuk, a particular verse, and a particular section of Torah. For at that time, that verse shines in him more than on other days. On that night, right? For at that time, that particular pasuk shines on the person more than on others. Right? So little did you know, but as you're walking around, you have a glowing pasuk from the Torah on you, right? What is your pasuk from the Torah today? What is your mitzvah today? What is your interpretation today? And it's very particular and specific. And on a different verse will shine in his soul, in their soul, according to their deeds on that day. According to their deeds on that day, right? So how you act on a particular day, it will affect which verse applies to you from the Torah, and how that will affect the way in which you're going to be taught the meaning of that verse above while you're asleep and your soul has ascended above. So no pressure, but it's all interconnected. And all of them according to the meaning upon which the root of his soul is based, as mentioned above. And here's a very interesting little bit of reported history. My teacher of blessed memory, this is Chaim Vital talking about his teacher, the Ari, Isaac Luria, each and every night would gaze upon his disciples standing before him. And he would see in them which verse was shining more on the forehead of that particular person, that particular man, based on the indwelling of his soul that was shining there. So you can see, right, that they all would gather together in front as a spiritual fellowship around their teacher, around their teacher, and he would engage in a kind of clairvoyant contemplation, visual contemplation. And I mentioned this last time of the way that the Ari was known and was reported in this text and in other texts to have had his disciples would come before him, and he would be able to read the illumination of the letters and the words, and clearly the psukim, the verses, on their foreheads and on their palms and glowing on their face, right? So he was understood to be this, right? It was the nightly magical mystery tour of Isaac Luria and disciples, and he would gather them together, and he was a kind of physician and diagnostician of the soul, as reflected in the title of the book by Lawrence Fine I mentioned last time, Physician of the Soul, Healer of the Cosmos, Isaac Luria and his Kabbalistic Fellowship. And you can also see here, by the way, the powerful dialectic and interplay dynamic between the embodied nature of the lived self of at least the garment of that of the person, or how they were known in life, and their soul, their soul essence, which it seems clear to me is how they understood the very definition and essence of the soul. But still, he's saying that it was very much in a kind of embodied practice, right? Because they would stand before him and he would look at their physical visage. He would look at at what manifested on their body, on their bodies, right? At see in them what verse was shining more on the forehead of that particular person, right? You didn't know that your forehead was shining with a particular pasuk, a particular verse. But according to the disciples of the Ari, and this was clearly part of their spiritual practice, was that he would gaze upon their foreheads and see an illuminated pasuk that was a sign of what their soul needed to receive instruction in and to be connected to that night when it went on its nightly ascent to the Garden of Eden. And the text goes on to say, let me see whether this see whether I continue this in the next PDF, or whether we switched on from. Oh yes, right. So if you go to the second PDF, for the new one for today, so at the bottom of the first page of that, which is 10 of 24 in my original file, and before that individual would go to sleep, he would contemplate the meaning that the Ari partially explained to him, and he would recite that verse with his mouth. He would recite that verse with his mouth, right? So there's a kind of, we're seeing here this very intriguing report about kind of spiritual practices, both of the group of the Kabbalists and as disciples standing before the clairvoyant spiritual healer and diagnostician of the soul, but also the practice that each person was meant to do, right? That they should recite that verse as they're falling asleep, right? You should be reciting that verse as you're falling asleep, maybe almost like a kind of like mantra, like self lullaby of some sort, right? But it was actually meant to stimulate the mechanisms of the soul, because it says, so that when his soul, that person, would ascend above while he was asleep, when his soul would when his soul would ascend above in deposit during his sleep, right? It would be sent up and handed over to the teachers in the Garden of Eden. They would teach it to him more completely. They would teach it to him more completely, right? And you can actually see some of the references there in and comments that I made in footnote 18. But it's very fascinating in the sense that that there was this kind of highly embodied physical practice, right, of both the standing before the master teacher who could read your pasuk and therefore read your verse, and therefore also know how it related to interpretations that you needed to then be taught above, and the practice and the practice of the individual disciple mystic who would recite it before bed so that it would then have an effect upon the learning that would take place with the learning that would take place above. And just with regard to the mitzvot, before we turn to some discussion of this, and I think that'll be the deeper essence of what we'll talk about. I just wanted to also share how Shar HaGilgulim, how Chaim Vital speaks about the way in which the mitzvot function in all of this, because remember that the study of the Torah is inextricable for them from the performance of the mitzvot which flow from the Torah. And all of this has an impact upon one's soul, which is one's essence, right? Know that a person, it's a little farther down on that page, know that a person needs to fulfill all of the 613 mitzvot, right? So don't forget about any of them. Just a little bit of pressure. Know that a person needs to fulfill all the 613 mitzvot, and if he lacks one of them, then his soul is still lacking. Im chaser achat mehem, adayin nafsho chasera. Right. So in order to build and complete the wholeness of your soul, the soul, remember, which travels through many different physical lifetimes, right? If you is it going to say, if you didn't fulfill the mitzvot or a particular mitzvah properly in a previous Gilgul, in a previous incarnation, then now's your chance, right? What mitzvah have I come into the world to try to perfect, right? I think that's actually a very powerful contemporary application, right? Regardless of whether we fully take on the doctrine of Gilgul as they believed it, right? What does it mean to say that I've come into this world? What is my mitzvah destiny, right? What mitzvah or perhaps mitzvot do I really need to fulfill in my time, in my all too finite and limited time on this earth, right? And for them, it was about contributing to the larger wholeness of the soul that is built over time. But we can also ask ourselves, right? Both in terms of thinking about what pasuk, what verse is shining on my forehead, and do I need to recite in relationship to my actions that particular day, and how am I connected to a particular interpretation of Torah, that too. So that, and the idea that what are the mitzvot and the meanings of Torah, we could also say, right? If we talk about perushim and interpretations of meanings of Torah more broadly, what is the twist on Torah, right? To give this really more of a contemporary slant, right? What is the twist on Torah and the imperatives of Torah? Maybe just a handful of them that we choose to emphasize in our life. And I'm not just talking about ritual mitzvot, right? It could be the whole range of broader ethical mitzvot and so forth. What am I going to specialize in, or more powerfully, what do I want my mitzvah contribution in the world and in myself to be? What do I need to work on, right? And also, what twist what verse will be on my forehead, right? You could sort of ask yourself that question. What daily verse do I want to be shining from my forehead and and coming forth from my lips at night before I fall asleep, right? All as both in its literal sense and in its figurative sense of what is going to be my message, what is going to be the thing that I want to contribute to the world, and that I have something to say about that's connected to the Torah. Um, and I'll stop with this so we can have some conversation. But that the idea is that a person keeps the person keeps reincarnating in different physical lifetimes until the larger soul edifice has been built and healed. And in each physical lifetime, according to the Ari, it would be whether you would come before him, he would see the lights on your forehead, and he would say, "Okay, well, your mitzvah that you need to work on is X, right? Because of X, Y, and Z that happened in previous lifetimes." Or it might just be a way of saying, what is the mitzvah, and what is the interpretation of a particular verse of Torah that I need to guide my life and be my contribution to to Judaism and to humanity and to the larger healing of the world and of divinity. So let me pause there. There's a lot of different ideas. There's a lot more text also down below, but I'm not going to try to rush through that. I want to make sure we leave our time for some conversation. So, Alex, you wanna take the moderator reins?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Fishbane. I know I've seen a couple questions and hands raised. I think I saw Beth with your hand up first, and then there was a question from Tom in the chat that we can go to next.
Yeah, I find it interesting, the idea that we each have a particular pasuk written on our forehead, and that it's something to recite before we fall asleep, to work on that. And what struck me about that, what struck me personally about that, is a number of years ago, I took on the practice of reciting the bedtime Shema every night. And I also recite the prayer before sleep that's in Siddur Sim Shalom. And the first lines of the prayer before sleep are asking God, telling God, I hereby forgive anyone who angered, annoyed, or wronged me. Let no one be punished on my account. And it's so interesting to have a practice of saying that to myself each night. The calming effect that that has of letting go of whatever may have transpired that day, even if nothing particular happened, even if nothing special or negative happened between me and another person, it still yet has a very beneficial effect on me and my sleep. And I really find it fascinating. One of your footnotes, you talk about this, one of the authors you're quoting here talks about the idea that entering a dream state this way enables a person to sort of substitute for some of the Gilgul that they would otherwise have to commit to inevitably, and that it's got some soul repair during the sleep in this lifetime. I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yes. Number of things you said there, which I think are really important and really interesting. So first, perhaps I cited Tzvi Shalom there. I'm not sure, but it's one of the things that he talks about in his book Sleep, Death, and Rebirth in Lurianic Kabbalah was the idea that sleep could function if you either had a particular need or you were particularly adept in your technique, could function as a kind of shortcut to bypass reincarnation, right? Because sleep is 1/60th of death, according to the tradition. So there's a kind of correlation between sleep and the death world. But it's almost like Kabbalistic chutes and ladders, right? Where you suddenly you can suddenly able to ascend. But there's also a kind of powerful repair in tikkun that can take place in that moment. And I love what you mentioned about the bedtime Shema, which is also very central to Kabbalistic thinking. And I wrote about this a little bit in terms of the Zohar's use of it in my book Art of Mystical Narrative, in the narrative ethics chapter, where there's a kind of ideal in virtue as the Zohar Kabbalists presented of a kind of intense, even unilateral state of forgiveness, right? That this was somehow understood to be a powerful virtue. And I think what you're pointing out also is that it's actually a powerful healing process for the individual, right? Right. So that perhaps in terms of perhaps related to what we learn from various Buddhist teachings, also about acceptance and release, and a kind of self-nurturing, if you will, or self-compassion that's related to that, right? It's both a sense of self-forgiveness, but it's also this outwardly directing release, right? Of not holding on to the toxicity of resentments that can I think it was the Buddha who said, right, can burn both people involved, right? Right. If you throw hot coals, you're going to burn your hands, right? Or something. That was the statement. But there is a powerful to that as a kind of notion of a notion of a centering of a particular kind of mitzvah or a particular kind of virtue, even if it's aspirational, right? And we keep working on it, right? To think with Robin Williams' character, right? What will your verse be, right? In the contribution to all of this, what will your verse from the Torah be?
Thank you.
Alex, who's next?
Yeah, the question in the chat from Tom was, how does this relate to the idea of different levels of soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Yechidah?
Beautiful. So in Shara Gilgulim, the Gate of Reincarnations, which this is taken, there's this very very elaborate process whereby with very rare exceptions, a person repairs one portion of that 5-part soul during a physical lifetime, right? So the idea is that the nefesh emerges as soon as the physical baby has come into the avir ha'olam, which itself is a very interesting kind of statement about Jewish conceptions of when life begins. Also, it's also or at least some Jewish conceptions. So that the nefesh enters into the body when the baby is born and enters into the air of the world. but then there are different, and then depending on where one is in this long cycle of soul rebirth, there would be different portions of the soul that would be acquired or at least partially repaired during one's all too ephemeral stay in this earthly garment. And generally, the vast majority of the generally the vast majority of the discussions of the multi-part soul are focused on nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and chaya and yechida, which are the top two, are actually addressed relatively rarely. But that's sort of like the on one foot answer, as it were, is that the Kabbalists believed, with certain exceptions, and certainly with the exception of the sleep shortcut, and certainly and sometimes with other processes, that in a given physical lifetime, and this is why it takes so long, right? One is able to have one portion, one part of that five-part soul either completely repaired or partially repaired through the different mitzvot that have to be performed in order to do it, or in the case of what we spent a lot of time talking about, the interpretation of Torah, the study of Torah, which itself is also, right, understood to be one of the greatest mitzvot.
I was wondering again about this pasuk on the forehead. If this is something that is discerned solely by the teacher making the observation, or if it's something that the individual is contemplating and therefore presents. In other words, how much of this is self-directed, self-motivated?
Yes. I think that when they were talking about being connected to like a clairvoyant master like Isaac Luria, or what they perceive to be a clairvoyant master, in any case, or a very charismatic one, right? That oftentimes would happen. We actually have and less individually driven. It was more like teacher guided. And another example of this, from a few hundred years after this, at the beginning of Hasidism in Eastern Europe, there was a report actually of Solomon Maimon, who was a maskil, a philosopher in Germany, and who had heard about things going on in Hasidism in Eastern Europe, and he wanted to go see for himself. And the short of it is, they're eventually all gathered together for the Shalashudas Saturday afternoon meal with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe tells each of the people around the table to recite a verse from the Torah, and they each do, and then he goes into a kind of trance, as it's described by Maimon, and through song and whatnot, and he then weaves together a homily, a drasha, that from all of those different verses spontaneously, that also was perceived by those gathered, that when addressing the meaning of that particular verse, it seemed like he was seeing into the soul of that person, right? Like what was their deepest angst, their deepest struggle, their deepest issue, that somehow he was able to, or at least they perceived it that way, he was able to pick up on that and to direct his intention to it. But I think that at least in an applied way, it certainly could most certainly be an individually directed practice, right? If we kind of take time to pay attention to where where we are emotionally, spiritually, morally, intellectually, and so forth, right? Where we are in our religious path, where we are in our moral path, and to try to think of what verse or from the Torah, or what mitzvah do I feel most connected to right now, and why, right? And that too can become a kind of daily practice. What, can I call on Tom? I know we have just a minute or so left.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Okay, so my question about the different levels of soul also applied to the earlier part of your remarks about the soul being part of God. So, are all parts of the soul part of God? Is one part more part of God than others? Are other parts garments, etc.? What's your take on that?
Yes. In the Kabbalistic schema, it would be that they are all part of divinity. They're all part of God, but they're kind of different. They're different branches that extend from the tree of souls, which is kind of like almost infinite it's too immense for us to even imagine, right? With all of its roots and its branches, or like the soul roots, the soul sparks that then stem out and extend outward. So the short of it is that they're all understood. The five parts are understood to be all part of the divine flow from the divine wholeness, but that they manifest as different components of that oneness that is everything, that is God, in different physical lifetimes. So there's probably more to say about it, but I know that we're out of time. So.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Fishbane, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. And we look forward to learning with you all again next week. Take care, everyone.